There is a quiet fear that almost everyone carries as they grow older. It is not the fear of pain, or even the fear of death. It is the moment you walk into a room and forget why you are there. The name that sits just out of reach. The simple task that disappears from your mind without warning. For most of human history, forgetting was not seen as a failure. Memory was never designed to hold everything. It was designed to hold what mattered for survival and to release the rest. But modern life tells us that forgetting means something is wrong, that the mind is breaking down, that we are losing ourselves, and yet, forgetting has always been part of how the human mind adapts over time. So the question is this: why do humans forget things more easily as they get older? Humans are not born with memory. This may sound obvious, but it is one of the most misunderstood facts about the human mind. At birth, the brain is not an archive waiting to be filled. It is a living organ still under construction. In early human history, this unfinished state was not a flaw, it was an advantage. A newborn human did not need memories, it needed adaptability. Unlike many animals that arrive with fixed behaviors, humans evolved to learn slowly from their environment. Memory, in its earliest purpose, was not about storing information. It was about shaping behavior through experience. What was safe? What was dangerous? What should be repeated? What should be avoided? As humans grew older, memory formed gradually, guided by survival needs rather than accuracy or completeness. This is important to remember, because from the very beginning, the human brain was never designed to record life like a camera. It was designed to filter. As human societies developed, memory followed the same principle. Early humans did not remember dates, names, or sequences. They remembered patterns, seasonal changes, locations of food, faces that signaled safety or threat. Memory was practical, selective, and deeply tied to the body. As humans aged, memory adjusted to changing roles within the group. Younger members needed quick learning and fast recall. Older members needed judgment, recognition, and long-term understanding. Forgetting small details was not a failure. It was a natural shift in function. It is something that has always existed, quietly shaping how memory works across the lifespan. Modern life often creates the illusion that memory should only grow stronger with time, as if the brain were a storage device accumulating data. But this expectation has no foundation in human evolution. The human brain evolved in an environment where holding too much information was costly, energy was limited, attention was precious. Forgetting allowed the brain to conserve resources and focus on what mattered most in the present stage of life. As humans moved beyond survival into complex social structures, this fundamental design did not change. The brain still prioritized relevance over completeness. This is why older humans often retain deep memories of meaning while losing access to surface details. It is not that memory disappears, it reorganizes. At this point in the human story, it becomes clear that memory was never meant to serve modern demands of constant recall. It was meant to support a living organism moving through time. Every stage of life carries different cognitive priorities, shaped by millions of years of human development. Forgetting, especially as humans grow older, is not a breakdown of the system. It is the system continuing to do what it was always built to do: adapt, simplify, and preserve what remains essential. From an evolutionary perspective, the human brain never treated memory as a neutral container. Every memory carried a cost. Storing information required energy, attention, and biological resources that early humans could not waste. For most of human history, survival depended on efficiency, not completeness. The brain evolved under constant pressure to decide what was worth keeping and what could be released. This is why memory developed as a selective system rather than a recording device. Early humans did not benefit from remembering everything they encountered. Too much information created confusion and slowed reaction. Instead, the brain learned to prioritize memories that directly supported survival where danger had appeared before. Which faces belonged to the group? These memories were reinforced through repetition and emotional relevance, while less useful details faded naturally. This design principle remained stable as humans aged. Younger humans needed memory for learning new skills and navigating unfamiliar situations. Older humans, however, played different roles. They relied less on rapid acquisition and more on pattern recognition, accumulated understanding, and social wisdom. The brain adjusted accordingly. It shifted resources away from constant short-term storage and toward maintaining long-term frameworks of meaning. Forgetting details was not a defect. It was a reallocation of cognitive energy. This shift made sense in an environment where elders guided decisions rather than performed tasks requiring speed or precision. As human societies became more complex, the environment changed faster than biology. Writing, clocks, schedules, and later digital tools created new expectations for memory that the brain was never designed to meet. The modern world began to demand continuous recall of names, dates, instructions, and fragmented information. Yet the brain continued to operate on ancient rules. It still asked a simple question of every experience: is this necessary for survival at this stage of life? When the answer was no, the memory weakened. This mismatch between modern expectations and evolutionary design is one of the main reasons forgetting becomes more noticeable with age. The brain is not failing, it is maintaining an older contract with reality. Around this point in the human lifespan, memory increasingly favors depth over breadth. Emotional significance outweighs surface detail. Experiences connected to identity, relationships, and long-term values remain accessible, while minor facts slip away. From the standpoint of human origins, this pattern is logical. An organism preparing to conserve energy does not invest in temporary data. It preserves structures that help maintain stability. This is also why stress and overload accelerate forgetting. When the brain senses that resources are limited, it tightens its filters. It releases what it considers non-essential. In modern life, this often includes names, tasks, and recent information that lack emotional or evolutionary relevance. The result can feel alarming, but it is consistent with how memory has always functioned. Forgetting is not the enemy of memory. It is one of its oldest tools. By letting go of excess information, the brain protects itself from overload and preserves its ability to function across a long lifespan. When viewed through the lens of human development, it is a continuation of the same adaptive strategy that has allowed humans to survive, learn, and live long enough to grow old in the first place. As humans move through life, memory does not simply weaken or fade. It changes its purpose. This shift becomes most visible in later years, but it begins much earlier than most people realize. In early adulthood, memory is heavily tasked with building a future. Learning names, routines, procedures, and new environments supports movement, work, and adaptation. As these foundations settle, the brain gradually reduces its emphasis on constant acquisition. From an evolutionary standpoint, this transition reflects a change in role rather than a decline in capacity. In human groups, older individuals were not expected to memorize every detail of daily activity. They were relied upon for judgment, context, and perspective. The brain adapted to this expectation by reorganizing how memory is used. Instead of holding many small, temporary details, it favors integrated understanding. This is why older humans often remember stories, lessons, and emotional experiences more clearly than lists, instructions, or recent events. Memory shifts from speed to meaning. This reorganization also explains why forgetting becomes more noticeable. Modern society measures memory by performance: recall on demand, accuracy under pressure, and speed of response. These metrics do not align with how memory was shaped by human origins. The aging brain continues to optimize for relevance. It filters information based on long-term value rather than immediate utility. When details do not connect to purpose, identity, or emotional significance, they are less likely to be retained. This is not indifference, it is efficiency. The brain conserves energy by narrowing its focus. From a biological perspective, this conservation supports longevity. Maintaining constant alertness and storage requires resources that become increasingly precious over time. As the body ages, systems across the organism prioritize balance and stability. Memory follows the same principle. It releases what is not essential to preserve what supports continuity. This process is often misunderstood as loss because it contrasts with youthful memory patterns. Yet it reflects a consistent design logic. The brain has always adjusted its priorities based on the stage of life. When the demands of survival and reproduction decrease, the demands of coherence increase. Memory becomes less about capturing the present moment and more about integrating the past. This is why older humans often possess clarity about values and consequences, while struggling with short-term recall. Their memory system is not broken. It is aligned with a different function. In modern environments filled with constant stimulation, this natural adjustment can feel like failure. The brain is asked to perform tasks it was never optimized to sustain indefinitely. Names, passwords, notifications, and schedules flood a system designed for slower rhythms. Forgetting emerges as a protective response. By letting details slip, the brain prevents overload and maintains its ability to regulate emotion and identity. When viewed through the lens of human development, this shift reveals a deeper truth. Memory does not decline because humans grow older. It transforms because the brain continues to adapt to changing roles within life. Forgetting, in this sense, it is a sign that memory is still doing what it has always done, adjusting itself to support the human organism across time, preserving meaning while allowing unnecessary detail to fall away. As humans grow older, the brain does not simply lose capacity. It changes what it considers important. This shift in priority is subtle, gradual, and often misunderstood. In earlier stages of life, the brain is oriented toward expansion. It absorbs new information rapidly because survival and adaptation depend on learning unfamiliar environments, social structures, and skills. Memory during this period is outward-facing. It collects names, sequences, instructions, and rules because the individual is still constructing a place in the world. Over time, however, this outward expansion becomes less necessary. Routines stabilize, roles become defined. At this point, the brain begins to reorganize its priorities. From the perspective of human origins, this reorganization is not optional. It is essential. Energy within the body is finite, and the brain is one of the most energy-demanding organs. As the body ages, every system becomes more selective about how resources are used. The brain responds by shifting its focus away from constant intake and toward maintenance. This is why older humans often report that they can still think clearly, reason deeply, and reflect meaningfully, even as they struggle to remember small, recent details. The brain is not abandoning memory, it is reallocating attention. It prioritizes information that supports emotional stability, identity, and long-term understanding. This prioritization reflects ancient survival logic. In early human communities, older individuals were not expected to memorize every change in their surroundings. Their value lay in recognizing patterns, anticipating consequences, and guiding group behavior based on accumulated experience. The brain adapted to serve this role by favoring memories that reinforced judgment rather than speed. As a result, memory systems that support rapid recall gradually receive less emphasis. This does not mean they disappear, they simply become less dominant. In modern life, this shift can feel disruptive because contemporary environments reward quick recall and constant updating. Schedules change rapidly. Information arrives in fragments. Tasks require multitasking and immediate response. The aging brain, operating on older principles, resists this mode of functioning. It filters aggressively. When information does not connect to relevance or meaning, it is less likely to be retained. This filtering is often interpreted as forgetfulness, but from a biological standpoint, it is a protective adjustment. The brain limits exposure to cognitive overload. It reduces unnecessary strain. As humans age, maintaining emotional regulation becomes increasingly important. Stress, confusion, and constant alertness are costly to the organism. By narrowing memory priorities, the brain supports calmness and coherence. It allows the individual to remain oriented, reflective, and socially connected, even if surface details are lost. This explains why older humans may forget a recent conversation, yet remember clearly how a situation made them feel. Emotional memory remains robust because it serves a stabilizing function. From the standpoint of human development, this shift is not a sign of decline. It is a sign of continued adaptation. The brain is responding to the changing needs of the organism. It chooses depth over breadth, meaning over volume, stability over accumulation. Forgetting, in this context, is not a failure of memory. It is evidence that the brain is still prioritizing survival in the only way it knows how, by adjusting its focus as life progresses. One of the clearest differences between a younger brain and an older brain lies in how energy is distributed. Memory is not a separate function operating in isolation. It competes constantly with other systems for resources. Hormonal activity, neural plasticity, and physical resilience allow the brain to invest heavily in forming new connections. Energy flows toward exploration. The mind can tolerate noise, interruption, and repetition because the cost of recovery is low. It captures details quickly, even if many of them are not essential. As humans age, this energy landscape changes. The body becomes more conservative. Recovery takes longer. Systems that once operated effortlessly begin to demand more care. The brain responds by reassessing where energy is best spent. This reassessment does not target memory directly. It targets efficiency. Rather than supporting constant formation of new memory traces, the brain strengthens pathways that already exist. It favors consolidation over expansion. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Early humans who survived into older age did not benefit from endlessly absorbing new information. They benefited from maintaining coherence, social understanding, and internal stability. The brain adapted to support these goals by shifting its energy investment. Younger brains distribute energy widely, allowing many potential memories to form. Older brains concentrate energy narrowly, reinforcing fewer, more meaningful memory structures. This difference explains why learning new names, routines, or technologies often feels harder later in life. It is not because the brain has lost the ability to learn, it is because it no longer treats every new input as worthy of storage. The threshold for retention rises. Information must pass through stricter filters. It must connect to relevance, purpose, or emotional significance. Otherwise, it is released. In modern environments, this filtering process clashes with daily demands. Society expects continuous updating. Devices, systems, and schedules assume that the brain can operate indefinitely at youthful capacity. When the older brain resists this pace, forgetting becomes more visible. Tasks that rely on short-term memory feel heavier. Multitasking becomes draining. This is often interpreted as decline, but biologically, it reflects a rational redistribution of energy. The brain is protecting itself from overload. Energy saved from constant recall is redirected toward maintaining attention, emotional regulation, and identity. These functions are critical for well-being in later life. Without them, memory alone would offer little benefit. Stress plays a key role in this process. When the brain senses strain, it tightens its energy budget. It reduces investment in optional memory formation. This is why older adults often notice sharper forgetfulness during periods of fatigue, anxiety, or disruption. The brain is signaling that resources are limited. It responds by narrowing focus. This response is adaptive. It prevents cognitive exhaustion and preserves core functioning. Over time, this energy-based prioritization shapes how memory feels subjectively. The mind may seem slower, but it is often more deliberate. Recall may be selective, but understanding remains intact. From the perspective of human development, this trade-off reflects a consistent pattern. The brain does not aim to maximize memory quantity. It aims to sustain the organism across time. As energy becomes more precious, memory adapts accordingly. Forgetting emerges not because the system is breaking down, but because it is recalibrating. When viewed through this lens, age-related forgetfulness is not a failure of memory. It is evidence of a brain that continues to manage its resources wisely, choosing preservation over excess as the demands of life evolve. The modern environment does not cause the aging brain to forget, but it exposes how differently the brain now operates. For most of human history, daily life unfolded at a pace aligned with biological rhythms. Information arrived slowly, often through direct experience. Conversations were repeated. Tasks followed predictable patterns. Under these conditions, the brain's natural filtering process remained mostly invisible. What was forgotten rarely mattered, and what was remembered was reinforced through use. As humans grew older, the shift in memory priority blended seamlessly with the environment. There was little conflict between how the brain functioned and what life demanded. Modern life disrupted this balance. Information now arrives continuously, in fragments, and without repetition. Names, instructions, updates, and decisions compete for attention in rapid succession. This environment places heavy demands on short-term memory, the very system that the aging brain no longer prioritizes. As a result, forgetting becomes more noticeable, not because the brain has changed abruptly, but because the environment has. The aging brain still operates on principles shaped by human origins. It expects information to arrive with context, relevance, and time for integration. When information lacks these qualities, it fails to pass the brain's retention filters. This mismatch creates the experience many older adults describe, the sense that memory is slipping in situations that feel fast, crowded, or mentally noisy. In quieter settings, where information is meaningful and paced, memory often performs far better. This contrast reveals an important truth. Age-related forgetfulness is not uniform. It is highly dependent on context. The brain responds differently to environments that align with its priorities versus those that overwhelm them. Modern systems often require immediate recall without meaning. Passwords, lists, schedules, and abstract instructions are detached from survival relevance or emotional grounding. The brain, especially later in life, treats such information as expendable. It releases it quickly to protect deeper cognitive functions. This release can feel frustrating, but it serves a purpose. By limiting engagement with low-value data, the brain preserves its ability to regulate emotion, maintain identity, and navigate social relationships. These capacities remain essential for well-being as humans age. In contrast, environments that provide continuity allow memory to function more naturally. Familiar routines, repeated conversations, and emotionally significant interactions reinforce retention. This is why older adults often recall stories, relationships, and personal experiences with clarity, even when struggling with recent details. The brain is not resisting memory itself. It is resisting noise. Stress intensifies this effect. When the environment becomes demanding, the brain tightens its filters further. Under pressure, it prioritizes immediate stability over long-term storage. This is why forgetfulness often worsens during periods of disruption. Fatigue, uncertainty, and sensory overload signal the brain to conserve resources. Memory formation slows, and recall becomes more selective. This response is adaptive. It prevents cognitive exhaustion and supports resilience. From the perspective of human development, this interaction between brain and environment is expected. The brain evolved to function within a narrow range of conditions. Modern life pushes it beyond those boundaries, especially in later years. Forgetting emerges not because the brain fails, but because it refuses to operate in a way that threatens overall balance. It chooses protection over performance. Understanding this relationship reframes age-related memory changes. Forgetfulness is not simply a personal issue. It is a dialogue between biology and context. The aging brain continues to prioritize survival, stability, and coherence, even when the world asks for speed and accumulation. When viewed this way, memory changes with age are not signs of decline. They are signs of a brain maintaining its integrity in an environment that no longer matches the conditions it was shaped to navigate. Short-term memory is often the first place where aging feels visible. This is the kind of memory that holds information briefly, just long enough to use it. A name you hear once, an object you set down moments ago, a thought that passes through the mind while moving from one task to another. When people grow older, these moments begin to slip more easily, and this change can feel sudden and unsettling. Yet, from the perspective of human development, short-term memory was never designed to remain equally strong throughout life. Its role is closely tied to exploration, learning, and rapid adjustment, functions that are most critical earlier in the lifespan. In younger years, short-term memory acts like a temporary workspace. It keeps information active while the brain decides whether it is worth storing or acting upon. This system works efficiently when the brain has abundant energy and when the environment is new. As humans age, both conditions change. The environment becomes more familiar and the brain shifts its priorities. It no longer treats every piece of incoming information as potentially important. Instead, it evaluates quickly and releases what does not meet its relevance threshold. This is why short-term memory appears to weaken. The brain is not losing the ability to hold information briefly. It is choosing not to. From an evolutionary standpoint, this choice makes sense. Holding information in short-term memory requires constant neural activity. It demands attention, glucose, and coordination across multiple regions of the brain. In early life, this cost is acceptable because learning and adaptation are essential. In later life, the same level of constant activation becomes inefficient. The brain conserves energy by narrowing the window of temporary storage. Only information that signals importance, novelty, or emotional weight remains active long enough to be used. Everything else fades quickly. This selective fading can feel like failure in a modern context, where short-term memory is heavily relied upon for daily functioning. Modern tasks assume continuous mental tracking. Multi-step instructions, digital interfaces, and rapid transitions all place demands on short-term memory. When older adults struggle in these situations, the issue is not that short-term memory has disappeared. It is that the brain no longer supports sustained mental juggling. It prefers focus over fragmentation. This preference reflects deep biological logic. As the body ages, maintaining internal balance becomes more important than reacting to every external signal. Short-term memory, by its nature, keeps the brain in a state of readiness. It holds information open, waiting for action. Over time, remaining in this state becomes taxing. The brain responds by shortening the duration of temporary storage. This adjustment reduces cognitive strain and supports long-term stability. Another factor that influences short-term memory is attention. Short-term memory depends heavily on focused attention to function. With age, attention becomes more selective. The brain filters aggressively to avoid overload. When attention is divided or when information arrives without context, short-term memory disengages quickly. This is why older adults may forget something they just heard while remaining deeply absorbed in a meaningful conversation. The brain allocates attention where it believes it matters most. From the perspective of human origins, this behavior would have been advantageous. In stable environments, constant scanning and temporary storage were unnecessary. What mattered was recognizing familiar patterns and responding to meaningful changes. Short-term memory served its purpose early in life, then gradually stepped back as other systems took precedence. When viewed through this lens, the weakening of short-term memory is not a malfunction. The brain is adapting to a different phase of life, one where depth, coherence, and emotional regulation outweigh the need for rapid, temporary recall. Forgetting in this domain reflects a brain that is choosing efficiency over excess, preserving its resources as the organism moves through time. Short-term memory does not operate on its own. It depends almost entirely on attention. What the mind does not attend to, short-term memory cannot hold. This relationship becomes increasingly important as humans grow older. With age, attention itself changes. It becomes narrower, more selective, and less tolerant of distraction. This shift is often mistaken for decline, but from a biological perspective, it reflects a protective adjustment. The brain learns to guard its limited resources more carefully. In earlier life, attention is flexible and expansive. It jumps easily between stimuli, allowing the mind to track multiple inputs at once. This flexibility supports learning in unpredictable environments. As humans age, however, the brain gradually reduces this openness. It favors sustained focus over constant switching. This change has direct consequences for short-term memory. When attention is no longer distributed widely, information that arrives outside the main focus is less likely to be captured. In modern environments, where information arrives rapidly and from many directions, this becomes especially noticeable. Conversations overlap, devices interrupt, instructions are given while other tasks are underway. Under these conditions, short-term memory struggles, not because it is weak, but because attention is already committed elsewhere. The brain makes a choice. It prioritizes stability over breadth. This choice limits what enters temporary storage. Overload plays a central role in this process. The aging brain is more sensitive to cognitive load. When too much information arrives too quickly, the brain responds by tightening its filters. It reduces the amount of information it attempts to hold at once. Short-term memory becomes more fragile under pressure because the brain actively resists overload. This resistance is adaptive. Holding multiple pieces of information simultaneously increases mental strain and raises stress levels. Over time, repeated strain can disrupt emotional regulation and overall well-being. To prevent this, the brain allows short-term memory to drop information that lacks immediate relevance. This is why older adults often forget details during busy or chaotic situations, but recall information clearly in calm, focused settings. The difference is not capacity, it is context. Attention functions best when it can settle. When attention is fragmented, short-term memory disengages. Stress amplifies this effect. Under stress, the brain shifts into a protective mode. It prioritizes immediate safety and emotional control over information storage. Short-term memory, which requires calm and sustained attention, becomes secondary. This is why forgetfulness often increases during periods of anxiety, fatigue, or disruption. The brain is not failing to remember. It is choosing to regulate. From the perspective of human origins, this behavior would have been beneficial. In threatening or unstable environments, holding extra information could interfere with rapid decision-making. The brain evolved to release non-essential data when conditions were demanding. In later life, the threshold for what counts as demanding becomes lower. Sensory input, noise, and time pressure all signal the brain to conserve resources. Short-term memory responds by shortening its engagement. This shortening can feel like loss, but it is better understood as compression. The brain reduces exposure to unnecessary cognitive strain. Attention becomes a gatekeeper rather than an open door. This explains why older adults often report that they remember best when they slow down, focus on one thing at a time, and engage emotionally. Under these conditions, attention stabilizes and short-term memory functions more effectively. When life accelerates, memory falters. This pattern reveals a key insight. Age-related changes in short-term memory are not simply about memory itself. They are about the interaction between attention, overload, and the brain's evolving priorities. Forgetting emerges not because the mind can no longer hold information, but because it chooses not to hold information in environments that threaten balance. When attention is respected, memory follows. When attention is strained, memory withdraws. This relationship becomes more pronounced with age, reflecting a brain that increasingly values preservation over performance. Recent events are often the easiest to forget as humans grow older, and this can feel deeply confusing. A conversation from earlier in the day disappears, while a memory from decades ago remains vivid and intact. This contrast leads many people to assume that something is wrong with their mind. Yet from the perspective of how memory is formed and stabilized, this pattern follows a clear internal logic. New memories are fragile by nature. They begin as temporary neural patterns that require time, repetition, and favorable conditions to become stable. In younger years, the brain supports this process generously. It allows new experiences to linger, even when they are not immediately important. As humans age, this generosity decreases. The brain becomes more cautious about what it allows to settle. This caution is especially visible with recent events because they have not yet earned significance. They are untested. The brain evaluates them against existing knowledge, emotional relevance, and long-term usefulness. When recent information does not meet these criteria, it is released quickly. This release is often mistaken for failure, but it reflects a stricter standard for memory consolidation. Older brains are less willing to invest resources in experiences that may never matter again. This selectivity is shaped by a lifetime of accumulated information. With so much already stored, the brain becomes conservative. It resists adding new material unless it connects clearly to established meaning. This is why recent, routine events are most vulnerable to forgetting. They often resemble countless other moments that came before them. The brain sees no reason to distinguish them. In contrast, older memories were formed during periods of novelty and emotional intensity. Early experiences shaped identity, relationships, and survival strategies. They were reinforced repeatedly and integrated deeply. Over time, these memories became part of the brain's structural landscape. They are not easily displaced because they support continuity of self. Recent events lack this reinforcement. They exist briefly, waiting for validation. If that validation does not arrive, the brain lets them go. Sleep also plays a critical role in this process. Memory consolidation depends heavily on rest, especially deep sleep. As humans age, sleep patterns change. Deep sleep often becomes lighter and shorter. This reduces the window during which recent memories can be stabilized. The result is not an inability to form memories, but a narrowing of which memories survive. Only those that carry emotional weight or personal relevance receive enough reinforcement to persist. Others fade. Stress further complicates this process. When the brain is under strain, it deprioritizes consolidation. It focuses on immediate regulation rather than long-term storage. Recent events, already fragile, are the first to be affected. This is why forgetfulness increases during busy or emotionally demanding periods. The brain is protecting itself from overload. It sacrifices short-term detail to preserve overall stability. From the perspective of human development, this pattern is adaptive. An organism that has lived many years benefits more from maintaining coherence than from recording every new occurrence. The brain shifts toward preserving what anchors identity and understanding. Recent events must compete for attention with a vast internal history. Most do not win that competition. This does not mean that the mind is erasing the present. It means that it is selective about what it allows to become part of the long story. Forgetting recent events is not a sign that memory is collapsing. It is a sign that memory is filtering more aggressively. The brain is choosing continuity over accumulation. When viewed this way, age-related forgetfulness of recent moments reflects a mind that has learned, over time, that not everything needs to be kept. Some things can pass through without leaving a trace, allowing the deeper structure of memory to remain intact. One of the most striking features of memory in older age is the durability of distant memories. Events from childhood, early adulthood, or long past relationships often remain vivid, while recent experiences fade quickly. This pattern is not accidental. It reflects how memory stabilizes over time and how the brain assigns value across the lifespan. Older memories have survived because they passed through multiple stages of reinforcement. They were formed during periods when the brain was highly receptive, emotionally engaged, and frequently exposed to novelty. These conditions create strong neural foundations. Early memories are repeated, revisited, and woven into identity. Each time a memory is recalled, it is not simply retrieved, it is strengthened and reorganized. Over years and decades, this process embeds certain memories deeply within the brain's structure. They become reference points rather than isolated records. In contrast, new memories enter a system already filled with established patterns. It evaluates whether a new event adds meaning or merely resembles what has already been lived. If the experience does not stand out emotionally or contextually, it receives minimal reinforcement. From a biological perspective, this selectivity is efficient. The brain avoids redundancy. It prioritizes memories that contribute to a coherent life narrative. Older memories often meet this criterion because they shaped choices, relationships, and self-understanding. They were associated with firsts, transitions, and survival-relevant learning. These elements give them enduring strength. As humans age, memory increasingly serves to preserve continuity rather than capture novelty. This shift explains why distant memories feel stable and accessible. They support the sense of self across time. The brain protects them because losing them would disrupt identity. New memories, by contrast, must earn their place. Without emotional weight or repetition, they remain fragile. Another factor contributing to the strength of older memories is the context in which they were formed. Earlier in life, experiences were often embedded within simpler environments. There were fewer competing stimuli. Attention was more focused. This allowed memories to consolidate without interference. Modern life introduces constant interruption, fragmenting attention and weakening consolidation. For older adults, this fragmentation further reduces the likelihood that new memories will stabilize. Meanwhile, older memories were formed under conditions that favored deep encoding. They benefited from sustained attention, emotional engagement, and social reinforcement. Over time, they became resilient. The brain also revisits older memories more frequently. Reflection increases with age. People naturally revisit their past, reinterpret experiences, and integrate lessons learned. Each act of reflection refreshes memory pathways. This repeated activation keeps older memories accessible. Recent events rarely receive the same treatment. They pass quickly, replaced by new demands. Without reflection or reinforcement, they fade. This contrast can feel unfair, but it follows a consistent internal logic. The brain preserves what supports understanding and releases what does not contribute to long-term coherence. From the perspective of human origins, this pattern would have been advantageous. Elders carried the collective memory of the group. They remembered migrations, seasons, dangers, and social rules. These memories needed to last. The ability to retain distant experiences supported survival across generations. Remembering every recent detail, however, offered little benefit. The brain evolved to protect what mattered most. In modern times, this evolutionary design remains intact. The aging brain continues to favor memories that provide context and meaning. It treats them as anchors. New memories must compete for attention in a crowded mental landscape. Most do not persist. This does not indicate a failing mind. The durability of older memories reflects a memory system that values depth, continuity, and identity over constant accumulation. Forgetting recent events, while unsettling, is part of the same process that keeps the past alive and accessible. Older memories are not preserved by accident. The brain actively protects them because they serve a function beyond recall. They help maintain a continuous sense of identity. As humans age, this continuity becomes increasingly important. Life brings change, loss, and uncertainty. The brain responds by holding on to memories that provide orientation and stability. These memories act as internal landmarks. They remind the individual who they are, where they come from, and how they have navigated the world. From a neurological standpoint, memories tied to identity are distributed across multiple networks. They are not stored in a single location. They are connected to emotion, sensory experience, language, and meaning. This distribution makes them resilient. Even if one pathway weakens, others can support retrieval. New memories, by contrast, often remain localized and fragile until they are reinforced. Without strong emotional or personal relevance, they do not receive the same protection. Over time, the brain learns which memories support psychological coherence. It invests more resources in maintaining them. This investment is reflected in how often these memories are revisited. Reflection strengthens memory traces. As humans grow older, reflection becomes more frequent. People naturally look back, not out of nostalgia alone, but to integrate experience. This integration helps make sense of the present. Each time a memory is revisited, it is updated and reinforced. The brain uses this process to keep identity intact. In contrast, recent events often lack integration. They occur quickly and are rarely revisited. Without repetition or meaning, they fade. The brain does not treat them as essential. This selective reinforcement is not conscious. It is guided by emotional salience and relevance to the self. Memories associated with personal values, relationships, and life-defining moments receive priority. They are protected because losing them would threaten the sense of continuity that supports emotional well-being. As humans age, maintaining this continuity becomes a central task. The brain shifts toward preservation rather than expansion. It reduces investment in memories that do not contribute to this task. This shift explains why older adults often remember experiences that shaped them while forgetting routine details of daily life. The brain distinguishes between information that defines the self and information that merely passes through it. Stress and uncertainty intensify this distinction. When the environment feels unstable, the brain relies even more heavily on identity-based memories. These memories provide reassurance and grounding. They remind the individual of resilience and past success. New information, especially when it feels trivial or overwhelming, is less likely to be retained. The brain narrows its focus to protect emotional balance. From an evolutionary perspective, this behavior supports survival. In social groups, elders served as carriers of collective identity. They remembered traditions, stories, and lessons that bound the group together. These memories needed to persist. The brain evolved mechanisms to safeguard them. In modern life, this evolutionary function continues. The aging brain preserves memories that support self-understanding and emotional regulation. It treats them as non-negotiable. Forgetting new details is the trade-off. This trade-off can feel frustrating, but it reflects a coherent internal strategy. The brain is not indiscriminately losing memory. It is choosing which memories to defend. Identity-based memories form the core of this defense. They remain accessible because they serve a purpose that grows more important with age. Understanding this helps reframe age-related forgetfulness. The persistence of older memories is not a relic of the past. It is an active process. The brain is continuously working to maintain a stable sense of self, even as other cognitive functions change. This preservation allows the individual to remain grounded, reflective, and emotionally intact. New memories must earn their place within this structure. Many do not. The result is a memory system that appears uneven but is, in fact, deeply organized around the need for continuity across a long life. Emotion and repetition are the two strongest forces that keep older memories alive. Without them, even the most important experiences would fade. From the earliest stages of human development, memory has relied on emotional signals to decide what deserves preservation. Emotion marks significance. It tells the brain that an experience matters, that it should be returned to, reinforced, and protected. When an event carries emotional weight, the brain activates multiple systems at once. Sensory details become sharper, attention deepens, neural connections strengthen. This process increases the likelihood that the memory will be revisited in the future. Each return reinforces the memory further. Over time, these emotionally charged memories become stable and resilient. Many of the memories that remain vivid in older age were formed during periods of emotional intensity. Early relationships, moments of achievement, loss, or transition shaped identity and demanded adaptation. The brain responded by embedding these experiences deeply. Repetition played a critical role. Important memories were not experienced once and forgotten. They were recalled, discussed, and reflected upon repeatedly. Each repetition strengthened the neural pathways associated with them. In human societies, storytelling amplified this effect. Experiences were shared within families and communities, reinforcing memory through social connection. This collective repetition helped ensure that key experiences endured. As humans age, the role of repetition becomes even more pronounced. Older adults often revisit memories that carry emotional meaning. This revisiting is not accidental. It serves a regulatory function. Reflecting on past experiences helps maintain emotional balance and reinforces a sense of continuity. Each act of reflection reactivates the memory, strengthening it further. In contrast, recent experiences often lack both emotional intensity and repetition. They occur quickly and pass without reflection. The brain receives no signal that these experiences should be preserved. Without emotional tagging or repeated recall, the memory trace weakens. This is especially true in modern environments, where experiences are often fragmented and interrupted. Attention shifts rapidly, preventing deep emotional engagement. As a result, new memories struggle to stabilize. The brain does not treat them as important enough to protect. Over time, this difference creates a widening gap between old and new memories. Older memories feel solid and accessible. New ones feel fragile and elusive. This gap is not a sign of imbalance. It reflects the brain's reliance on emotion and repetition as guiding principles. When these elements are present, memory persists. When they are absent, memory fades. Stress further shapes this dynamic. Under stress, emotional regulation becomes a priority. The brain favors memories that provide comfort, familiarity, or reassurance. Older memories often serve this purpose. They remind the individual of resilience and past success. New memories, especially those formed under pressure, lack this reassuring quality. The brain does not reinforce them. Instead, it allows them to dissolve. From an evolutionary perspective, this behavior is adaptive. Emotional memories guided survival. They helped humans remember danger, safety, and social bonds. Repetition ensured that these lessons endured. As humans age, the brain continues to apply the same logic. It preserves memories that support emotional stability and releases those that do not. This selective preservation supports well-being. It allows the individual to remain anchored in meaningful experiences even as the flow of new information becomes overwhelming. Understanding this process reframes age-related memory changes. The persistence of older memories is not random. It is driven by emotion and repetition, the same forces that have shaped human memory across history. New memories fade not because the brain is failing, but because they lack the signals required for long-term survival within the mind. Memory remains faithful to its original purpose. It holds on to what shaped the individual and lets go of what does not continue to serve that role. As humans grow older, many begin to feel that the brain becomes tired more easily. This fatigue is often interpreted as weakness, as if the mind is no longer capable of keeping up. But from the perspective of how the brain actually functions, this interpretation is misleading. The aging brain is not tired because it is failing. It is tired because it is carrying more than it was ever designed to handle at once. Over a lifetime, the human brain accumulates experiences, habits, emotional patterns, responsibilities, and internal narratives. None of these disappear when new information arrives. They remain active in the background, shaping perception and attention. The brain must navigate this complexity while continuing to process the present. This constant balancing act requires effort. In early life, the brain operates in a relatively open environment. There are fewer internal demands competing for attention. Energy can be directed outward toward learning and exploration. As humans age, the situation reverses. Internal processing increases. Reflection, evaluation, and emotional regulation take up more cognitive space. The brain is not idle. It is working continuously to maintain coherence across a growing internal world. This ongoing work consumes energy. When new information arrives, it must compete with existing structures for attention and resources. The brain responds by becoming more selective. It limits how much it processes at once. This limitation is often perceived as mental fatigue. In reality, it is a protective response. The brain is preventing overload. Modern environments intensify this strain. Information arrives rapidly and without pause. Notifications, conversations, and decisions pile up. Each new input demands evaluation. Is this important? Is it urgent? Does it require action? For an aging brain already managing a complex internal system, this constant demand becomes exhausting. The brain must allocate energy carefully. It cannot process everything fully. When the load becomes too heavy, the brain prioritizes essential functions. Memory for details becomes secondary. This shift does not indicate decline. It reflects a rational adjustment to sustained cognitive pressure. Another factor contributing to mental fatigue is emotional load. As humans age, emotional experiences accumulate. Loss, responsibility, and concern for others become more prominent. The brain spends significant energy regulating these emotional states. Emotional regulation is not passive. It requires active neural engagement. When emotional demands increase, fewer resources remain for memory processing. The result is a sense of mental tiredness that appears without obvious cause. This fatigue often accompanies forgetfulness, reinforcing the belief that the brain is weakening. In fact, the brain is actively managing competing demands. From an evolutionary standpoint, this behavior makes sense. The human brain evolved to handle complexity gradually, not simultaneously. When complexity exceeds manageable limits, the brain reduces intake. It narrows focus to maintain stability. This narrowing can feel like exhaustion, but it protects long-term function. Forgetting details is part of this protection. By releasing non-essential information, the brain reduces strain and preserves its capacity to function over time. This explains why older adults often feel mentally drained in busy environments but remain clear and engaged in calm settings. The issue is not capability. It is load. When the cognitive environment aligns with the brain's priorities, fatigue decreases and memory improves. When demands exceed capacity, fatigue emerges. Understanding this distinction is important. Mental tiredness in older age is not a signal that the brain is failing. It is a signal that the brain is working hard to manage complexity. It is conserving energy, filtering information, and maintaining balance. Forgetfulness under these conditions is not a flaw. It is a consequence of a brain that has adapted to carry a lifetime of experiences while continuing to function. The feeling of mental fatigue reflects effort, not decline. It reveals a mind that is still engaged, still processing, and still protecting itself against overload. Modern life places a unique kind of strain on the aging brain, one that did not exist for most of human history. Multitasking has become the norm rather than the exception. People are expected to listen, respond, remember, and decide simultaneously. Devices demand attention. Information arrives fragmented and without clear hierarchy. For a younger brain, this environment is challenging but manageable because cognitive flexibility and recovery are high. For an older brain, the same environment creates sustained pressure. The issue is not intelligence or ability. It is the cumulative cost of constant switching. Every time attention shifts, the brain expends energy to disengage from one task and engage with another. This process becomes more costly with age. Neural transitions slow slightly, and recovery requires more time. When switching happens repeatedly, fatigue builds quickly. The brain responds by limiting how much it attempts to hold or process. Memory, particularly for details, becomes the first area to be reduced. This reduction is often interpreted as forgetfulness, but it is better understood as load management. The brain is protecting itself from exhaustion. Multitasking also disrupts memory formation. Memory requires sustained attention to stabilize. When attention is divided, information fails to consolidate. This is why older adults often feel that they heard something but cannot recall it later. The information was never fully encoded. It passed through without anchoring. Conversations occur alongside distractions. Instructions are given while other tasks are underway. The brain rarely receives uninterrupted time to process. Over time, this erodes confidence in memory. The individual feels forgetful, even though the underlying issue is constant interruption. Modern life demands frequent choices, many of which carry little meaning but still require evaluation. What to respond to, what to ignore, what to prioritize. Each decision consumes cognitive resources. For an aging brain already managing a complex internal world, this constant decision-making adds to fatigue. The brain responds by simplifying. It reduces engagement with low-priority information. Memory for such information fades quickly. This simplification supports survival, not performance. Emotional multitasking further compounds the problem. Older adults often carry concern for family, health, and stability. These concerns occupy mental space. When new information arrives, it must compete with ongoing emotional processing. The brain cannot expand indefinitely. It must choose where to focus. When emotional demands are high, memory for external details becomes less reliable. This trade-off preserves emotional regulation but weakens recall. From an evolutionary perspective, this response is adaptive. The brain prioritizes what affects well-being and social cohesion over abstract data. In environments that demand constant multitasking, this prioritization becomes visible as forgetfulness. The aging brain resists fragmentation. It prefers depth and continuity. When forced into rapid switching, it disengages. This disengagement protects long-term function. It reduces stress and prevents burnout. Understanding this helps reframe age-related memory complaints. Forgetting in multitasking environments is not a personal failure. It reflects a mismatch between brain design and modern demands. The brain evolved to handle tasks sequentially, with clear focus and meaning. When asked to operate otherwise, it limits participation. Memory suffers not because it is weak, but because the brain refuses to sustain an unsustainable pace. This refusal is a form of self-preservation. It signals that the brain values balance over overload. In calmer, focused environments, memory often returns. The mind performs best when it is allowed to engage fully with one thing at a time. As humans age, this need becomes more pronounced. Multitasking becomes costly, not because the brain is broken, but because it has learned to protect itself. Forgetting details under these conditions is the visible outcome of a brain choosing survival over excess. Emotional load is one of the most underestimated sources of mental fatigue in later life. Unlike physical effort, emotional effort leaves no visible trace, yet it consumes a significant amount of cognitive energy. As humans grow older, emotional responsibilities often increase rather than decrease. Concern for family, health, financial stability, and the well-being of others occupies the mind continuously. These concerns do not switch off when daily tasks end. They remain active in the background, shaping attention and draining resources. The brain must constantly regulate these emotional signals to maintain balance. This regulation requires effort. It engages networks responsible for monitoring, calming, and prioritizing emotional responses. When these systems are active, fewer resources remain available for memory processing. The brain is working hard, just not in a way that produces visible output. Long-term stress intensifies this effect. Stress keeps the brain in a state of heightened vigilance. Even when no immediate threat is present, the brain remains alert, scanning for potential problems. This state consumes energy continuously. Over time, sustained vigilance becomes exhausting. The brain responds by simplifying cognitive demands. It reduces engagement with non-essential information. Memory for details becomes less reliable because the brain prioritizes emotional regulation over storage. This shift is adaptive. It protects the organism from burnout. Anxiety and worry further complicate this process. Worry occupies mental space without resolving itself. It loops, revisiting the same concerns repeatedly. Often, it loses. The brain allows it to pass through without retention. This is why people under prolonged stress frequently report forgetfulness. The issue is not memory capacity. It is cognitive congestion. The mind is crowded with unresolved emotional content. When emotional load is high, the brain treats it as a priority. It reallocates resources accordingly. In earlier environments, stress was often acute and temporary. The body responded, then returned to baseline. In modern life, stress can be chronic. The brain remains in a prolonged state of management. Over time, This state reshapes cognitive priorities. Memory becomes more selective. The brain preserves what supports emotional stability and releases what does not. This selective release can feel like decline, but it reflects ongoing adaptation. Another important factor is emotional meaning. As humans age, they often become more sensitive to emotional nuance. Interactions carry more weight. Memories tied to emotion are processed deeply, while neutral information receives less attention. This emotional weighting influences what is remembered. Practical details that lack emotional relevance are more likely to be forgotten, especially when the mind is already managing stress. This pattern reinforces the impression that memory is failing, when in fact it is being redirected. Fatigue emerges from this constant emotional work. The brain rarely rests fully. Even during quiet moments, emotional regulation continues. This invisible labor accumulates. When fatigue reaches a certain threshold, the brain reduces optional processing. Memory formation suffers. Forgetting becomes more frequent. This is not a breakdown. It is a signal that the system is protecting itself. Understanding this helps explain why memory often improves when emotional load decreases. In periods of calm, when worries ease, the brain has more capacity for attention and storage. Memory feels clearer. This fluctuation reveals the true relationship between emotion and cognition. Forgetfulness is not fixed. It responds to the internal environment. From a developmental standpoint, this relationship highlights a key truth. The aging brain prioritizes emotional stability because it supports overall well-being. Memory adapts to serve this priority. When emotional demands are high, memory yields. This trade-off preserves mental health at the cost of detail. It reflects a brain that continues to choose survival strategies appropriate for its stage of life. Mental fatigue in older age is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of sustained emotional engagement. The brain remains active, responsive, and protective. Forgetting under these conditions is not a failure of memory. It is the visible outcome of a system working continuously to manage the weight of a long life. Memory does not exist independently of the rhythm of life. It is shaped by pace, repetition, and timing. As humans grow older, one of the most significant changes they experience is not simply in memory itself, but in how their internal rhythm aligns with the world around them. In earlier stages of life, the brain is better able to tolerate speed. The internal rhythm of the body supports this pace. Energy replenishes quickly, attention rebounds easily, and memory keeps up. The body becomes more deliberate. Recovery takes longer. It functions best when information arrives at a pace that allows integration. When life moves too quickly, memory struggles to keep up. This mismatch becomes increasingly visible in later years. Modern life operates at a speed that rarely pauses. Conversations move quickly. Instructions are compressed. Decisions are expected immediately. For an aging brain, this pace creates tension. The brain cannot slow the external world, so it adapts internally. Memory becomes selective, not because it cannot function, but because it cannot function at the demanded speed without cost. This adaptation is often misunderstood as decline. In reality, it reflects a brain that is honoring its biological rhythm. Memory needs time to form. It requires moments of stillness to settle. When experiences arrive too quickly, they remain unprocessed. The brain lets them pass, rather than forcing consolidation. This behavior protects mental stability. It prevents overload and preserves coherence. In slower environments, memory often improves noticeably. Older adults recall information better when conversations are unhurried, when tasks are done one at a time, and when there is space to reflect. This improvement reveals that memory capacity has not disappeared. It has become more sensitive to pace. The brain responds positively when life slows to match its rhythm. This sensitivity is rooted in human origins. For most of human history, life followed natural cycles. Activity alternated with rest. Learning occurred through repetition and observation. Memory formed gradually. Speed was rare and often associated with danger. The brain evolved to function optimally within this slower rhythm. As humans age, the brain returns more fully to this original pattern. It prioritizes calm integration over rapid reaction. When modern life ignores this need, memory suffers. The brain resists acceleration by disengaging from details. Forgetting becomes a way to cope with excessive speed. This response is not passive, it is active regulation. The brain is signaling that it cannot safely operate at the imposed pace. It chooses to protect itself rather than comply. This choice preserves long-term function at the expense of short-term recall. Understanding this relationship helps explain why memory complaints often increase during periods of busyness and decrease during calmer times. The brain is not inconsistent. It is responsive. When rhythm and pace align with biological needs, memory stabilizes. When they clash, memory withdraws. From a developmental perspective, this shift reflects wisdom rather than loss. The brain adapts its functioning to support longevity. It favors conditions that sustain mental health over those that demand constant output. Forgetting in fast-paced environments is not a flaw. It is a signal that the mind requires a different tempo. As humans grow older, respecting this tempo becomes essential. Memory thrives not on speed, but on rhythm. When life slows, memory finds its footing again, revealing a mind that remains capable, attentive, and deeply responsive to the conditions that allow it to function well. It compresses time, narrows attention, and forces the brain to operate ahead of its natural rhythm. When humans grow older, this pressure becomes increasingly costly. The brain no longer transitions smoothly between tasks at high speed. Each demand arrives before the previous one has fully settled. Under these conditions, memory begins to fail in visible ways. This is not because the brain cannot remember, but because it cannot process information fast enough to store it properly. Memory requires a brief window of stability. When that window is closed by urgency, information slips through. The faster the pace, the less time the brain has to evaluate, tag, and integrate experience. In younger years, the brain tolerates this compression. Neural systems recover quickly from interruption. In later years, recovery slows. When tasks are rushed, the brain prioritizes immediate action over memory formation. It focuses on getting through the moment rather than preserving it. This shift explains why forgetfulness increases during hurried situations. The brain is operating in survival mode, not archival mode. From a biological perspective, haste signals risk. It activates stress responses that narrow focus and reduce cognitive flexibility. Under stress, the brain directs energy toward regulation and decision-making, not memory. This response evolved to handle short bursts of danger, not prolonged urgency. Modern life, however, extends haste across entire days. Schedules are tight. Interruptions are constant. The aging brain responds by disengaging from details to conserve energy. Forgetting becomes a consequence of this disengagement. The relationship between speed and memory is especially pronounced in later life because the brain's tolerance for disruption decreases. Each interruption carries a higher cost. When people rush, they divide attention. Divided attention weakens encoding. Information is heard but not absorbed. Actions are completed, but the context is lost. Later, the absence of memory feels alarming, yet the memory was never formed. The brain did not have the conditions it needed. This is why slowing down often leads to immediate improvement. When tasks are spaced, when instructions are given calmly, and when there is time to pause, memory performs better. The brain is given permission to process rather than react. This permission becomes increasingly important with age. The aging brain values completion over speed. It prefers to finish one process before beginning another. When forced to rush, it drops non-essential functions. Memory is among the first to be reduced because it is not immediately necessary for action. This reduction protects the organism from overload. It prevents cognitive exhaustion. In evolutionary terms, this behavior would have been adaptive. Rapid movement and urgency were associated with threat. The brain shifted focus to immediate response. Memory was deferred. Once safety returned, memory could resume. In modern environments, urgency rarely resolves. The brain remains in a prolonged state of readiness. This state undermines memory over time. Forgetfulness becomes chronic, not because the brain is deteriorating, but because it is constantly rushed. Understanding this dynamic reframes age-related memory complaints. The problem is not age alone. It is the combination of age and speed. When life accelerates beyond the brain's rhythm, memory suffers. When pace aligns with biological capacity, memory stabilizes. The aging brain is not broken by slowness. It is strengthened by it. Slowing down restores the conditions under which memory can function. It allows attention to settle and information to take root. Forgetting under pressure is not a personal failure. It is a predictable outcome of forcing a system designed for depth to operate at speed. As humans age, haste becomes an invisible tax on memory. Reducing that tax reveals a mind that still remembers well, as long as it is allowed to move at a pace that respects its changing needs. Slowness creates the conditions that memory needs to recover. This does not mean doing less, but allowing experiences enough time to settle. As humans grow older, the brain responds differently to time. It no longer benefits from rapid input. It benefits from spacing, continuity, and moments of pause. When life slows, even slightly, memory often improves in noticeable ways. This improvement is not sudden or dramatic. It is subtle but consistent. The brain regains its ability to integrate information rather than simply react to it. Slowness reduces cognitive pressure. It widens the window during which attention can remain steady. Memory depends on this steadiness. When attention is allowed to rest on a single task, information has time to be evaluated and tagged. The brain can decide whether it matters. Without this decision-making space, memory formation is interrupted. In slower conditions, the brain does not feel rushed to move on. It completes one process before beginning another. This completion supports consolidation. As humans age, this need for completion becomes more pronounced. The brain prefers coherence over speed. When tasks are approached calmly, memory has a chance to anchor. This anchoring restores confidence. People often notice that they remember better when they are not trying to remember. When pressure is removed, memory functions more naturally. Slowness also reduces stress signals. The brain interprets a slower pace as safety. When safety is sensed, stress hormones decrease. This hormonal shift supports memory consolidation. Under calmer conditions, the brain is more willing to invest energy in storing information. It does not need to conserve resources aggressively. As a result, fewer details are dropped. This relationship explains why memory often feels clearer during relaxed conversations, walks, or quiet routines. The environment signals that there is no need to rush. The brain responds by opening its filters slightly. Information is allowed to stay longer. Repetition also becomes more effective in slow rhythms. When life slows, experiences are revisited naturally. Conversations continue. Routines repeat. This repetition strengthens memory without effort. The brain does not have to struggle to hold information. It encounters it again. Over time, these gentle repetitions rebuild confidence in memory. The individual feels less forgetful, even though no deliberate training has occurred. This effect reflects how memory evolved to function. For most of human history, learning occurred slowly. Skills were practiced over time. Knowledge was passed through repeated exposure. Memory formed through familiarity rather than urgency. As humans age, the brain increasingly returns to this mode. It responds best to environments that resemble its original conditions. Slowness restores alignment between brain function and lived experience. Another important aspect of slowness is emotional regulation. When pace decreases, emotional processing becomes smoother. The brain is not constantly switching between states. This stability frees up cognitive resources. Memory benefits from this release. Information is no longer competing with unresolved emotional signals. The mind feels clearer because fewer processes are running simultaneously. This clarity is often mistaken for improvement in memory capacity. In reality, it reflects improved conditions for memory expression. The capacity was always present. It was simply constrained by speed. Slowness does not reverse aging. It does not restore youthful memory. What it does is allow the aging brain to function at its best. It honors the brain's changing priorities. It supports depth, integration, and continuity. Forgetfulness decreases not because the brain is fixed, but because the environment becomes more compatible. Understanding this relationship reframes the role of pace in memory. Speed is not neutral. It carries cognitive cost. As humans grow older, that cost becomes more visible. Slowness reduces the tax. It creates space for memory to do what it still does well. When life slows, memory is no longer forced to compete. It is allowed to settle, connect, and persist. The result is not perfect recall, but a sense of ease. The mind feels less strained. Forgetting feels less alarming. Memory becomes a quieter, more reliable presence. In later life, this quiet reliability matters more than speed. It gives it room to function as it was designed to across a long human lifespan. For many people, the most distressing part of forgetting is not the forgetting itself, but what it seems to imply. Forgetfulness is often interpreted as a warning sign, a signal that something is fundamentally wrong. This fear is especially common as humans grow older. A missed word, a forgotten name, a moment of confusion can trigger anxiety about losing one's mind. Yet this interpretation overlooks an essential distinction. Forgetting does not automatically mean loss of intelligence, awareness, or identity. In fact, forgetting is a normal and necessary function of a healthy brain. From the perspective of human development, memory has never operated as a perfect record. It has always involved selection. What is kept and what is released are determined by relevance, context, and emotional weight. Forgetting plays a critical role in this process. It allows the brain to remain flexible and efficient. Without forgetting, the mind would become overwhelmed by accumulated detail. This is why forgetting exists at every stage of life. It does not suddenly appear in older age. What changes with age is visibility. As the brain's priorities shift, forgetting becomes more noticeable, particularly in situations that demand speed or surface recall. This visibility fuels fear, but fear itself can worsen memory. Anxiety activates stress responses that interfere with attention and recall. The more a person worries about forgetting, the more cognitive resources are diverted away from memory. This creates a cycle where concern amplifies the very behavior it fears. Understanding the difference between natural forgetting and pathological decline is crucial. Natural forgetting is inconsistent. It fluctuates with stress, fatigue, pace, and emotional load. One day memory feels clear, another day it feels scattered. Pathological decline, by contrast, follows a different pattern. It is persistent, progressive, and disruptive to basic functioning. Natural forgetting allows people to remain oriented, reflective, and emotionally intact. They may forget details, but they understand context. They recognize themselves and others. They can reason and adapt. This distinction matters because many older adults experience normal memory changes but interpret them through the lens of fear. That fear adds unnecessary burden. The brain responds to fear by tightening its filters further. Forgetting increases, not because the brain is deteriorating, but because it is under emotional pressure. From an evolutionary standpoint, this response is predictable. Fear signals threat. Under threat, the brain prioritizes regulation and safety over recall. Memory formation becomes secondary. This mechanism protects survival, not performance. In later life, when fear of decline becomes common, this mechanism can be activated repeatedly. The result is a mind that appears more forgetful under stress, yet functions well when calm. This pattern reveals an important truth. Forgetting is not a reliable indicator of cognitive loss on its own. Context matters. Conditions matter. Emotional state matters. A calm, supported brain remembers better than a fearful one. Recognizing this helps restore balance. It allows individuals to respond to forgetfulness with understanding rather than alarm. Forgetting, when natural, does not erase intelligence or identity. It reflects a brain that continues to adapt to changing demands. The mind remains capable of insight, judgment, and meaning, even as surface recall changes. Understanding this distinction is the first step toward reducing unnecessary fear around memory in later life. Worry changes how memory behaves, often more than age itself. As humans grow older, they become more aware of their mental processes. A small lapse that once passed unnoticed now draws attention. This attention quickly turns into monitoring. The mind begins to watch itself. Every pause, every forgotten word becomes evidence to be evaluated. This self-observation creates tension. Memory, which functions best when it operates freely, becomes constrained. The brain senses pressure. Under pressure, it performs differently. Attention narrows, flexibility decreases, and recall becomes less reliable. This is not because memory is weakening, but because it is being interfered with. When a person worries about forgetting, they divide their attention between the task at hand and the act of monitoring themselves. This division reduces the resources available for memory formation and retrieval. The brain is no longer fully engaged with the present moment. It is split between experience and evaluation. This split makes forgetting more likely. Over time, repeated worry reinforces this pattern. Forgetting leads to concern. Concern leads to increased monitoring. Monitoring leads to further forgetting. The cycle becomes self-sustaining. From the outside, it can resemble decline. Internally, it is a stress response. The brain is caught in a loop of self-protection. Anxiety keeps the nervous system slightly activated. Even mild activation is enough to disrupt memory processes. Memory requires a degree of calm to function smoothly. When the mind is tense, recall becomes effortful. Words feel just out of reach. Thoughts stall. These moments reinforce fear, even though they are caused by fear itself. This dynamic is especially common in later life because older adults often place greater importance on mental clarity. They may associate memory with independence and identity. When memory feels uncertain, the stakes feel higher. This emotional weight amplifies worry. The brain responds by tightening control. It tries to avoid mistakes by slowing down. Ironically, this caution interferes with natural recall. Memory becomes less spontaneous. The harder one tries to remember, the more elusive memory feels. From a biological perspective, this response is understandable. The brain interprets worry as a signal of threat. Under threat, it prioritizes regulation and safety. Memory retrieval is not essential for immediate safety, so it receives fewer resources. This prioritization is adaptive in dangerous situations, but counterproductive in everyday life. When worry becomes chronic, the brain remains in this protective mode longer than necessary. Forgetfulness increases, not because memory capacity has changed, but because access to memory is constrained. This explains why memory often improves in relaxed situations. When attention is absorbed in conversation, laughter, or quiet reflection, worry recedes. The brain relaxes its grip. Memory flows more easily. These moments reveal that the underlying ability to remember is still present. It is the emotional context that determines whether memory is accessible. Self-monitoring also disrupts the rhythm of thought. Natural recall relies on associations. Thoughts emerge through connection rather than force. When a person watches their thinking too closely, this associative process is interrupted. The mind becomes rigid. Memory retrieval slows. This rigidity is often mistaken for loss. In reality, it is a change in mental posture. From the perspective of human development, this pattern highlights the role of trust. The brain functions best when it is trusted to operate without constant supervision. As humans age, rebuilding this trust becomes important. Understanding that occasional forgetting is normal reduces anxiety. Reduced anxiety restores memory access. This does not eliminate forgetfulness, but it softens its impact. The mind becomes less preoccupied with performance and more engaged with experience. Memory improves not because the brain has changed, but because the conditions around it have. Recognizing the influence of worry allows individuals to step out of the cycle of fear. Forgetting no longer signals danger. It becomes a passing event rather than a verdict. In this calmer state, memory resumes its natural role. It supports understanding and continuity rather than proving competence. The brain remains capable, responsive, and adaptive as long as it is not burdened by constant self-evaluation. Reassurance changes how the brain uses memory. When fear eases, the mind regains flexibility. This effect is often underestimated, yet it plays a decisive role in how memory functions in later life. Understanding what is happening inside the brain removes unnecessary pressure. When a person no longer interprets every lapse as a sign of decline, attention relaxes, memory benefits immediately. The brain stops operating in defensive mode and returns to a more natural state of engagement. This shift does not require training or effort. It occurs when the mind feels safe enough to stop monitoring itself. Safety signals reduce stress responses. Stress hormones decrease. Neural systems responsible for integration become more active. Under these conditions, memory retrieval improves. Words come more easily. Thoughts flow with less resistance. The difference is often subtle but meaningful. It demonstrates that memory access depends heavily on emotional context. When reassurance is present, the brain no longer treats forgetting as a threat. It allows recall to happen spontaneously. Understanding also restores trust in the mind. Trust reduces interference. When individuals accept that forgetting is part of normal aging, they stop forcing memory. Forced recall disrupts association. Memory works through connection, not pressure. Reassurance allows the brain to follow its natural pathways. This is why people often remember something after they stop trying to recall it. The brain needs space, not force. In later life, providing this space becomes increasingly important. Reassurance also shifts attention outward. Instead of focusing on internal performance, the mind engages more fully with the present moment. Engagement strengthens memory encoding. When attention is relaxed and curious, information is more likely to be retained. This effect explains why memory often feels better during calm conversations or enjoyable activities. The brain is not distracted by self-evaluation. It is present. From a developmental perspective, this pattern reflects an important adaptation. The aging brain values stability. It responds well to environments that signal acceptance rather than judgment. When the individual feels supported, the brain allocates more resources to connection and understanding. Memory becomes a byproduct of engagement rather than a goal. This shift reduces frustration. Forgetting still occurs, but it no longer dominates awareness. The emotional response changes. Instead of panic, there is patience. This patience further improves memory access. The cycle reverses. Calm leads to better recall. Better recall reduces fear. Reduced fear sustains calm. Over time, this creates a more stable cognitive experience. Reassurance also affects how memory is interpreted. Occasional forgetting is seen as normal rather than alarming. This interpretation prevents the escalation of anxiety. The brain remains in a balanced state. It does not overreact to minor lapses. This balance supports long-term cognitive health. From the standpoint of human origins, reassurance within a group would have been protective. Social support reduced stress and allowed individuals to function effectively even as abilities changed. The brain evolved to respond positively to acceptance and understanding. In modern life, self-reassurance plays a similar role. When individuals understand their memory changes, they provide their own sense of safety. This internal safety supports cognitive resilience. Memory does not need to be perfect to be functional. It needs to be accessible when it matters. Reassurance helps ensure this accessibility. It allows the brain to operate without constant defense. Forgetting becomes less disruptive. Memory becomes more reliable within its natural limits. Understanding and reassurance do not reverse aging, but they optimize how the brain adapts to it. They reduce unnecessary strain and restore confidence. The mind becomes less occupied with proving itself and more focused on living. In this state, memory fulfills its true purpose. It supports meaning, continuity, and connection. It does not need to perform on demand. It needs to serve the organism across time. Reassurance creates the conditions for this service to continue. It allows memory to function as it was always meant to, even as life progresses. Memory does not respond equally to all experiences. It is deeply shaped by emotion and meaning. As humans grow older, this relationship becomes more pronounced. Experiences that carry emotional weight are remembered more easily, while neutral information fades quickly. This pattern is not a flaw. It reflects how memory has always been organized. Emotion acts as a signal. It tells the brain that something matters. When an experience carries emotional meaning, the brain engages more fully. Attention deepens. Sensory details sharpen. Neural connections strengthen. These conditions support memory formation. As humans age, the brain becomes even more dependent on these signals. It no longer invests energy in storing information that lacks emotional relevance. Meaning becomes the primary filter. This shift explains why older adults often remember events tied to relationships, values, and personal significance while forgetting routine details. The brain is not losing capacity. It is refining its criteria. Experiences that connect to a sense of purpose receive priority. Those that do not are released. From the perspective of human development, this makes sense. As life progresses, survival depends less on accumulating new information and more on maintaining coherence. Emotional memory supports this coherence. It reinforces identity and guides behavior. The brain adapts by strengthening pathways associated with meaning. This adaptation becomes visible as selective memory. Modern life often misunderstands this selectivity. It values factual recall and speed, yet these metrics do not align with the aging brain's priorities. Older adults may struggle to remember names or dates, but recall the emotional essence of experiences with clarity. This difference reflects a shift from external detail to internal significance. Meaningful memories anchor the individual. They provide continuity and orientation. The brain protects them because they support emotional stability. This protection is not conscious. It emerges from how memory systems interact with emotional processing. When an experience resonates emotionally, it is revisited more often. Each revisit strengthens memory. Over time, these memories become resilient. In contrast, experiences lacking emotional engagement are rarely revisited. Without repetition, they fade. As humans age, opportunities for emotionally meaningful engagement often change. Daily routines may become repetitive. Novelty decreases. Without emotional stimulation, fewer new memories are reinforced. This can create the impression that memory is declining rapidly. In reality, memory is responding to a change in input quality. The brain is receiving less that feels worth keeping. When emotionally meaningful experiences increase, memory often improves. This improvement reveals an important truth. Memory is not simply about storage, it is about connection. When experiences connect to what matters, they are remembered. When they do not, they pass through. From an evolutionary standpoint, this pattern is adaptive. Emotional memory guided social bonds, danger recognition, and group cohesion. These functions remain important in later life. The brain continues to prioritize them. Understanding this relationship helps reframe age-related forgetfulness. Forgetting neutral details is not a failure. It reflects a memory system tuned to meaning. The aging brain asks a different question than it did earlier in life. It asks, not is this new, but does this matter? When the answer is yes, memory responds. When the answer is no, memory lets go. This shift does not diminish the mind, it refines it. Memory becomes less cluttered and more focused. It serves understanding rather than accumulation. In later life, this focus supports emotional well-being. It allows the individual to remain connected to what feels important. Forgetting becomes less troubling when seen in this light. Memory continues to function, guided by emotion and meaning, just as it always has. The difference is that these guiding forces now play a more visible role. Recognizing this helps restore confidence. Memory is not disappearing. It is aligning itself more closely with what gives life depth and purpose. As humans grow older, this becomes one of the most decisive factors in what is remembered and what is lost. Information that connects directly to personal values, identity, or lived experience is treated differently by the brain. It is not processed as neutral data. It is woven into an existing framework of understanding. This weaving strengthens memory. The brain recognizes that information tied to the self has long-term relevance. It invests resources accordingly. In contrast, information that remains detached from personal meaning is processed superficially. It may be understood in the moment, but it is not anchored. Without anchoring, memory fades. This difference explains why older adults often recall personal stories, lessons, and emotionally charged moments with clarity while struggling with names, dates, or abstract facts. The brain prioritizes what reinforces identity. As life progresses, identity becomes more stable. New information must relate to this stability to be retained. From a biological standpoint, this prioritization conserves energy. The brain avoids storing material that does not integrate with existing structures. Meaning acts as a filter. When information resonates personally, it passes through. When it does not, it is released. This filtering becomes stricter with age because the brain has already accumulated a lifetime of experiences. It no longer needs to build identity from scratch. It refines it. Personal meaning also increases repetition. Experiences that matter are revisited mentally and emotionally. They are talked about, reflected upon, and connected to other memories. Each revisit reinforces neural pathways. Over time, this repetition solidifies memory. Neutral information rarely receives this reinforcement. It appears once, then disappears. Without repetition, memory traces weaken. In modern life, much of the information people encounter lacks personal meaning. Instructions, updates, and transient details fill the day. The aging brain treats these inputs as temporary. It does not assign them lasting value. This response can feel frustrating in environments that demand recall of such information. Yet, it reflects a consistent internal logic. The brain is protecting itself from overload by focusing on what contributes to a coherent life narrative. Another important factor is emotional alignment. Information that aligns with personal concerns or goals carries emotional weight. This weight strengthens encoding. The brain becomes more attentive. Sensory details are noticed. Context is absorbed. Memory forms more readily. As humans age, emotional alignment becomes more selective. The brain responds strongly to what feels relevant to current priorities. This selectivity explains why learning new skills or information later in life often succeeds when it connects to personal interest. When interest is present, memory engages. When it is absent, memory withdraws. This pattern reflects adaptation rather than loss. From an evolutionary perspective, personal meaning guided survival decisions. Knowing what mattered within one's environment was more important than knowing everything. Elders benefited from remembering experiences that informed judgment and social cohesion. The brain evolved to support this function. In later life, this evolutionary design remains active. The brain continues to ask whether information supports understanding and continuity. If it does, it is kept. If it does not, it is discarded. Understanding this helps reframe age-related forgetfulness. Difficulty remembering neutral details is not a failure of memory capacity. It is a sign that the brain is operating according to its priorities. Memory remains responsive and capable when meaning is present. It struggles when meaning is absent. This distinction matters because it suggests that memory can feel stronger in the right contexts. When life includes engagement, purpose, and personal relevance, memory follows. The aging brain is not indifferent. It is discerning. It seeks connections that matter. Forgetting becomes less troubling when this discernment is recognized. Memory is not vanishing. It is choosing. And it chooses in favor of what deepens understanding, reinforces identity, and supports a coherent sense of self across time. Meaning and repetition. As humans grow older, the absence of these elements becomes increasingly visible. Many daily experiences are brief, interchangeable, and disconnected from personal relevance. Tasks are completed quickly, information is consumed once, and attention moves on immediately. Under these conditions, memory has little reason to engage. The brain registers the experience, but it does not invest in keeping it. This is not indifference, it is efficiency. Without meaning, there is no signal that the experience should be preserved. Without repetition, there is no opportunity for reinforcement. The result is forgetting that feels sudden and uncontrollable. In earlier stages of life, novelty itself often supplied meaning. New experiences shaped identity and demanded learning. As life becomes more familiar, novelty decreases. If meaning does not replace novelty, memory input becomes thin. The brain receives information, but it lacks depth. Experiences pass through without anchoring. This pattern is especially common in modern routines. Many activities are performed out of habit. Without reflection, attention is partial. Emotional engagement is minimal. Under these conditions, memory formation is weak at any age, but it becomes more noticeable later in life because the brain is already selective. The aging brain requires stronger signals to invest energy. When daily life lacks those signals, memory naturally disengages. Repetition also plays a crucial role. Memory strengthens through return. When experiences are repeated, discussed, or reflected upon, they become familiar. Familiarity supports retention. Modern life often eliminates this process. Conversations are brief. Experiences are replaced quickly. There is little opportunity to revisit what happened. Without repetition, even meaningful moments may fade. For older adults, this absence of reinforcement has a greater impact. The brain relies on repetition to decide what deserves space. When repetition is missing, memory remains fragile. This fragility is often misinterpreted as decline. In reality, it reflects a change in input quality. The brain is receiving less that is worth holding. Another factor is fragmentation. Experiences are often interrupted before they can be fully processed. Attention shifts mid-task. Emotional engagement is broken. This fragmentation prevents consolidation. Memory requires continuity. When continuity is absent, memory weakens. The aging brain is particularly sensitive to this disruption because it no longer compensates as easily. Younger brains may fill gaps through sheer volume of input. Older brains prefer completeness. When experiences feel incomplete, the brain lets them go. This is why memory often feels stronger in environments that allow sustained engagement. Calm routines, meaningful conversations, and repeated activities provide the conditions memory needs. This contrast reveals an important truth. Memory problems in later life are often environmental rather than internal. They reflect how life is structured, not how the brain is deteriorating. When meaning and repetition return, memory responds. From an evolutionary perspective, this relationship is expected. Memory evolved to preserve what shaped behavior and identity. Experiences that were repeated and emotionally significant were remembered, others were discarded. This principle has not changed. What has changed is the environment. Modern life often removes the very elements memory depends on. The aging brain continues to operate by ancient rules. It waits for signals that rarely arrive. When they do arrive, memory remains capable. Understanding this helps reframe forgetfulness. Forgetting is not always a sign of loss. It is often a sign of insufficient input quality. Memory cannot hold what it is not given the chance to integrate. Restoring meaning and repetition does not require effort or training. It requires space. Space to engage, to reflect, and to return. When life provides this space, memory finds its footing again. The aging brain is not resistant to memory. When experiences are meaningful and revisited, memory responds. Forgetfulness under modern conditions reflects a mismatch between how life unfolds and how memory works. Recognizing this mismatch allows individuals to stop blaming themselves. Memory has not abandoned them. It is waiting for conditions that allow it to do what it has always done. Preserve what matters and let the rest pass by. As humans grow older, this connection becomes more visible. Physical state influences cognitive function in direct and indirect ways. When the body is strained, memory suffers. When the body is supported, memory stabilizes. This relationship is often overlooked because memory is treated as a purely mental process. In reality, memory depends on systems that extend throughout the organism. Sleep, energy regulation, and physical comfort all play a role in how information is processed and retained. Among these factors, sleep holds a central position. Sleep is not a passive state. It is an active phase during which the brain organizes and consolidates memory. Experiences from the day are reviewed, sorted, and integrated. This process is especially important for transforming short-term impressions into lasting memory. As humans age, sleep patterns change. Sleep may become lighter, shorter, or more fragmented. These changes reduce the time available for memory consolidation. The brain still attempts to perform this function, but the conditions are less favorable. As a result, Recent memories remain unstable and are more easily lost. This does not mean the brain has lost the ability to consolidate memory. It means the window for doing so has narrowed. The quality of sleep matters as much as the duration. Deep sleep supports memory stabilization. When deep sleep decreases, memory formation becomes less efficient. Many older adults experience this change without realizing its impact. They may feel rested enough to function, yet their memory feels unreliable. The underlying issue is not awareness or effort. It is biology. The brain is receiving less uninterrupted time to integrate information. Physical discomfort further complicates this process. Pain, tension, or restlessness disrupt sleep and drain energy. The brain must allocate resources to manage bodily signals. This allocation reduces the resources available for memory processing. Over time, the cumulative effect becomes noticeable. Forgetfulness increases, especially for recent events. The individual may attribute this change to age alone, without recognizing the role of physical state. Fatigue also affects attention during waking hours. When the body is tired, attention becomes less stable. Memory encoding weakens because information is not fully processed in the first place. The brain cannot consolidate what it never clearly received. This creates a cycle. Poor sleep leads to reduced attention. Reduced attention leads to weaker memory. Weaker memory increases concern. Concern further disrupts sleep. The cycle reinforces itself. From a developmental perspective, this interaction between body and memory reflects how human systems evolved to function together. The brain does not operate independently. It relies on signals from the body to regulate energy use. When the body signals strain, the brain conserves resources. Memory becomes more selective. This selectivity protects overall functioning but reduces recall. Understanding this relationship helps reframe age-related memory changes. Forgetfulness may reflect physical strain rather than cognitive decline. Supporting the body supports the mind. When sleep improves, memory often follows. This improvement may be gradual, but it is consistent. The brain regains time to organize experience. Memory becomes more accessible. This connection emphasizes an important truth. Memory is not solely a matter of effort or attention. It is a reflection of the organism as a whole. As humans age, caring for the body becomes inseparable from caring for the mind. Forgetting does not arise in isolation. It emerges from the interaction between physical state and cognitive demands. Recognizing this interaction reduces self-blame. It shifts focus from fear to understanding. Memory changes are not simply signs of loss. They are signals that the system needs support. When the body receives that support, memory often responds. The aging brain remains capable, but it depends on conditions that allow it to function. Sleep, rest, and physical balance are not luxuries. They are foundational elements of memory across the human lifespan. Fatigue alters memory in ways that are often misunderstood. As humans grow older, the effects of tiredness become more pronounced, not because the brain is weaker, but because its margin for recovery narrows. In earlier life, a night of poor sleep or a physically demanding day could be absorbed with little consequence. The brain recovered quickly. Memory function returned without effort. In later life, recovery takes longer. When fatigue accumulates, its impact on memory becomes visible. This visibility can be alarming, but it follows a clear physiological logic. Fatigue reduces the brain's ability to maintain stable attention. Attention is the gateway to memory. When attention wavers, information is processed incompletely. The brain receives fragments rather than coherent experiences. Memory cannot consolidate fragments effectively. This unreliability often appears suddenly, but it reflects a gradual buildup of strain. Lack of sleep intensifies this effect. Sleep deprivation disrupts the brain's internal timing. Neural communication becomes less synchronized. Memory systems rely on coordination across regions. When coordination weakens, memory formation suffers. Older brains are more sensitive to this disruption because they already operate closer to their optimal limits. Even small reductions in sleep quality can have noticeable cognitive effects. The brain responds by conserving energy. This conservation is adaptive. It protects essential functions such as emotional regulation and basic awareness. Memory becomes secondary. Physical fatigue compounds the problem. When the body is tired, the brain must allocate resources to maintain posture, balance, and basic comfort. Memory, which is not immediately necessary for survival, receives fewer resources. The result is forgetfulness that feels disproportionate to the situation. A simple lapse becomes harder to recover from. Stress often accompanies fatigue. Physical exhaustion lowers tolerance for stress. Stress responses activate systems that further suppress memory. The brain shifts into a mode focused on coping rather than learning. In this mode, memory formation slows dramatically. This shift explains why memory often improves after rest, even without deliberate effort. When the body recovers, the brain relaxes its restrictions. Memory access returns. This pattern highlights an important distinction. Memory difficulties associated with fatigue are reversible. They fluctuate with physical state. They do not follow a steady downward trajectory. This fluctuation distinguishes natural memory change from pathological decline. When rest improves, memory improves. When fatigue returns, memory weakens again. The brain is responding dynamically to conditions. From an evolutionary perspective, this responsiveness makes sense. Fatigue signals vulnerability. Under vulnerability, the brain prioritizes preservation. Once safety and energy are restored, memory resumes. Many older adults experience ongoing tiredness due to disrupted sleep, physical discomfort, or sustained stress. The brain remains in a semi-protective state. Memory difficulties become persistent, not because the brain cannot remember, but because it rarely receives full recovery. Understanding this helps shift focus from fear to care. Supporting physical rest supports cognitive clarity. Small improvements in sleep and energy can yield noticeable changes in memory function. This responsiveness reveals that memory remains intact beneath fatigue. It is constrained, not lost. Recognizing fatigue as a central factor reduces self-blame. Forgetting is not a moral failing or a sign of collapse. It is a signal that the system needs rest. When rest is provided, memory often responds with surprising resilience. The aging brain is not fragile. It is sensitive. It reflects the state of the body more directly. Caring for physical energy becomes a form of cognitive support. Memory depends on this support to function well. Fatigue does not erase memory. It temporarily limits access. When energy returns, memory follows. This understanding reframes age-related forgetfulness as a condition of use rather than a condition of loss. Recovery restores memory by restoring balance. As humans grow older, the brain depends more heavily on periods of genuine rest to maintain stable function. Rest is not simply the absence of activity, it is a state in which the body and brain are allowed to recalibrate. During recovery, systems that were strained return to baseline. Energy is redistributed. Neural communication becomes more synchronized. Memory benefits from this restoration. When recovery is incomplete or irregular, memory remains unstable. The brain continues to operate under constraint. This constraint shapes how information is processed and retained. In later life, recovery requires more intention because spontaneous recovery becomes less reliable. The body does not reset automatically after short pauses. It needs sustained periods of low demand. When these periods are present, memory often stabilizes. The mind feels clearer recall improves. This improvement does not indicate sudden enhancement of cognitive ability. It reflects the removal of strain. Memory systems are no longer competing for limited resources. They can function within their natural range. Rest also affects attention. During recovery, attention regains flexibility. It is no longer locked into vigilance. This flexibility supports memory encoding. Information is received more fully. The brain has time to evaluate and integrate experience. In contrast, when rest is insufficient, attention remains rigid. Memory encoding becomes shallow. Over time, this shallow encoding accumulates. Forgetting increases. Many older adults experience this pattern without recognizing its source. They attribute memory difficulties to age, rather than to ongoing under-recovery. Physical restoration plays a parallel role. Muscular tension, pain, and discomfort consume cognitive resources. When the body is allowed to relax, these demands decrease. The brain can redirect energy toward cognitive processes. Memory improves as a result. This relationship highlights the importance of gentle routines. Consistent sleep schedules, quiet periods, and unhurried transitions support recovery. They create predictability. Predictability signals safety to the brain. When safety is perceived, stress responses diminish. Memory systems become more active. Emotional recovery is equally important. Emotional strain prolongs cognitive load. When emotional demands ease, the brain releases its grip. Memory retrieval becomes smoother. This is why memory often feels clearer after emotionally supportive interactions. The brain responds to reassurance by reducing defensive processing. In evolutionary terms, recovery periods would have followed exertion. The brain evolved to alternate between engagement and rest. In modern life, this alternation is often disrupted. Activity extends without adequate pause. The aging brain is particularly sensitive to this disruption. It signals the need for recovery through fatigue and forgetfulness. These signals are often misunderstood. Forgetting is seen as failure rather than communication. The brain is indicating that it cannot sustain performance without rest. When this signal is respected, memory stabilizes. The mind does not need to be pushed. It needs space. Recovery does not restore youthful memory patterns. It restores functional memory. It allows the brain to operate as it is designed to at this stage of life. This operation emphasizes coherence, emotional regulation, and meaningful recall. Forgetting decreases not because the brain becomes stronger, but because it is no longer constrained. Understanding this reframes the role of rest. Rest is not optional. It is foundational. Memory depends on it. In later life, respecting recovery rhythms becomes essential for cognitive stability. When the body and mind are allowed to recover, memory remains accessible. When recovery is neglected, memory withdraws. This withdrawal is protective, not punitive. The brain continues to adapt to support the organism. Forgetfulness, under strain, reflects a system that is still responsive. It is asking for conditions that allow it to function. Providing those conditions restores balance. Memory follows balance. As humans age, recovery becomes the bridge between physical state and cognitive clarity. It sustains memory not by effort, but by alignment with the brain's enduring need for rest and renewal. As humans reach later stages of life, one of the most significant adjustments they face is not biological, but psychological. It is the adjustment of expectations. For much of adulthood, memory is treated as a tool that should perform reliably on demand. Names should come quickly. Details should be accessible. Forgetting is framed as error. This expectation is reinforced by social norms and modern systems that reward speed and precision. As humans age, maintaining this expectation becomes increasingly stressful. The brain is asked to perform according to standards that no longer match its priorities. This mismatch creates tension. Memory does not fail because it is incapable. It struggles because it is being measured by the wrong criteria. Acceptance reduces pressure. When pressure decreases, memory becomes more accessible. This effect is not philosophical, it is physiological. Reduced pressure lowers stress responses. Attention becomes less rigid. Recall flows more naturally. The brain no longer treats memory as a test to pass. It treats it as a process to support living. This shift is especially important in later life because memory's role changes. It no longer needs to prove competence. It needs to support understanding, connection, and continuity. Clinging to youthful standards interferes with this role. The brain resists by withdrawing. Forgetting increases. When expectations soften, the brain responds by re-engaging. This response highlights the importance of acceptance. Acceptance does not mean resignation. It means alignment. It means recognizing how memory now works and allowing it to operate within its natural limits. From a developmental perspective, this adjustment reflects wisdom. Each stage of life brings different cognitive priorities. Earlier stages emphasize acquisition and speed. Later stages emphasize integration and meaning. When they resist it, memory becomes strained. Acceptance also reduces self-criticism. Self-criticism consumes cognitive resources. It activates monitoring and fear. These processes interfere with memory retrieval. When individuals stop judging themselves for forgetting, they free mental space. Forgetting becomes less disruptive. The mind feels calmer because it is no longer under constant evaluation. This calm supports cognitive stability. Letting go also applies to control. Trying to control memory tightly often backfires. Memory relies on association and flow. Control introduces rigidity. The harder one tries to force recall, the more elusive it becomes. Accepting occasional forgetting allows the brain to operate flexibly. It restores trust between the individual and their mind. This trust is crucial in later life. The brain performs best when it is not treated as fragile or defective. From an evolutionary standpoint, acceptance within a group would have reduced stress and allowed elders to contribute effectively. In modern life, self-acceptance plays a similar role. It creates internal conditions that support cognitive function. Memory does not need to be perfect to be valuable. It needs to serve life as it is now. Adjusting expectations allows memory to fulfill this role. It shifts focus from performance to presence. Presence strengthens engagement. Engagement supports memory. This sequence reveals a deeper truth. Memory changes with age are not only about loss, they are about redefinition. The brain redefines what it needs to remember. When individuals accept this redefinition, memory becomes less adversarial. It works with them rather than against them. Forgetting becomes part of the rhythm rather than a threat. This acceptance does not eliminate memory challenges. It changes the relationship with them. That change alone can significantly reduce distress and improve daily functioning. In later life, the goal is not to restore memory to its earlier form. The goal is to allow memory to function well within its current form. Letting go of unrealistic expectations is the first step toward that alignment. Adjusting how one views memory changes how life is experienced. When humans grow older, memory no longer serves the same purpose it once did. It shifts from supporting performance to supporting continuity. This shift becomes easier to live with when expectations are aligned with reality. Instead of asking memory to function like a test of ability, it can be allowed to function as a companion to experience. This adjustment reduces friction. Daily life feels less pressured. Forgetting loses its power to disrupt emotional balance. Memory becomes quieter, but more reliable within its role. Quality of life improves not because memory becomes sharper, but because the relationship with memory becomes gentler. When individuals stop measuring themselves against youthful standards They free mental energy. This energy flows into presence. Presence strengthens engagement. Engagement supports memory naturally. The cycle that once created fear reverses. Calm leads to clarity. Clarity leads to confidence. Confidence reduces anxiety. Anxiety no longer interferes with recall. This change does not require effort or discipline. It requires understanding. Understanding allows the brain to operate without constant defense. In later life, this defensive posture is costly. It consumes attention and undermines well-being. Releasing it restores balance. Memory begins to work in service of life rather than against it. This shift also influences how moments are valued. Instead of focusing on what is forgotten, attention moves to what is felt, understood, and connected. Life becomes less about accumulation and more about meaning. Memory supports this transition by preserving what matters most. Names and details may fade, but relationships, values, and understanding remain accessible. This is not a lesser form of memory. It is a different one. It reflects a mind that has learned what is worth keeping. From a developmental perspective, this represents completion rather than decline. Each stage of life refines cognitive priorities. Later life emphasizes integration. Memory adapts to this emphasis. When individuals cooperate with this adaptation, life feels more coherent. Forgetting becomes less alarming. It is seen as part of the process rather than a failure. The systems reinforce one another. Life becomes smoother because fewer internal battles are being fought. Acceptance also allows space for rest. Rest restores clarity. Clarity supports understanding. Understanding reduces fear. The loop closes gently. Memory is no longer the center of concern. It becomes part of the background, quietly supporting daily life. This is where memory functions best. Not under scrutiny, but within flow. The final message of this journey is simple and grounded. Forgetting does not mean losing oneself. It often means the mind is letting go of what it no longer needs. The human brain was never designed to hold everything forever. It was designed to support a life as it unfolds. As humans age, unfolding looks different. Memory reflects that difference. It becomes selective, meaningful, and protective. The goal is not to remember more, but to remember what supports living fully in the present moment. When this goal is embraced, memory no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes an ally again. And so, as this reflection comes to a close, the question remains open, not as a challenge, but as an invitation. If memory was never meant to hold everything, what might it be choosing to protect for you now?